proud of them because they kind of go on and teach you pretty in depth what they teach you, but then they kind of just stop, and you're like, wait, how do I merge conflicts? How do I, stuff like that. So I believe I'm recording now. Hello, internet world out there. Let me share my screen. Okay, so thank you guys for sticking with this. You guys are more than halfway through the course now, which is awesome. So thanks for sticking around. Again, I'm more and more proud of this course the more times we run it, because we do honestly tweak it. Like Alex said, we take our feedback, we're making it better and better. Believe me, the course that you guys are taking right now is a billion times better than the first time I ran it, and we've only run it 3 times. So very happy with that. Okay, so today we're going to dive into the most complex lecture in these 8 lectures together, okay? Before we do that, I want to mention some housekeeping things. Session 7. So today's session 5, next week's session 6. Session 7 is actually canceled. I'm going to be flying back from New York at that point, and I won't be able to make it in time. So we're going to cancel that. But I think I can squeeze those 2 lectures into one. So the session 8 is really going to be session 7 plus session 8. I really encourage you guys to go to this session 7 and 8. Right now in the curriculum, it says other topics and where to go, so it might not sound that interesting. Believe me, that other topics is going to cover a lot of cool stuff, okay? And in fact, it's going to cover something that when you go to read other people's Rails code, a lot of what I'm teaching you now, you'll be like, how come my code doesn't look like their code, right? So this other topics covers a lot of cleaning up and a lot of going more towards the Rails way of doing things, okay? Because now that you understand the theory, we can clean up a lot of stuff in the other topics, okay? So I really encourage you guys to come to that last one. Don't forget it just because we skipped the week 4. And even though it's during exam time, I really encourage you to come. It's just an hour and a half to really wrap up your Rails knowledge and test you where to go. And then I'll show you a really, really, really cool thing that's all I'm going to say to intrigue your interest, okay? Really cool thing in that last lecture. So come out for that. And then we'll take a survey of how many people want to see a follow-up course. And maybe we can organize something when you guys return in September. Maybe even something over the summer. If most of you guys are in town, we could try to arrange something in the summer as well, okay? So, again, today, session 5 is the most complex lecture that you're going to face. There's a lot of concepts tossed into this. And I urge you guys, if you don't understand what I'm going through, follow along with the code today, but go back and read the lecture slides, okay? They explain every single thing that I go through today, okay? So a lot of complex topics thrown in here, but if you get through today, session 6 will be quite easy. Session 7 will be session 7, 7, 8 will be a lot of fun, okay? All right, so Restful Resource Part 2. So last week, we started exploring what a RESTful resource was and what a RESTful resource is when it comes to web. Okay, and what a RESTful resource is basically a data entity that we can interact with in standard ways using standard protocols. Okay, this is an adopted web convention. So people say when you send a GET request to /products, I expect a list of products to come back. Okay, if I do a GET request to /products / a number or an ID, I expect that to return me a single product, right? We did this with our blog posts. So we started exploring exactly what it meant to be a RESTful resource. And we went through basically this table here that outlined every piece of that RESTful resource. Let me just bring that up one more time. Where is it here? Okay, we went through this table. And this is the standard REST HTTP protocols and ways to interact with a certain resource. And then we talked about Ruby on Rails. Your goal is to structure as much of your application as you can against RESTful resources, okay? If you follow this convention, you'll have nice solid code, basically, okay? So last week, we went over 2 of these things. We went over the index and we went over the show. And we're going to basically continue to go down this route, building this RESTful resource, okay? Now, before we continue, before we move on to new and create, we have to take a little bit of a sidetrack, okay? Just a tiny little sidetrack, and we're going to explore a data structure that's heavily used in Ruby, heavily used in Ruby on Rails, okay? But I found not that heavily used in other languages. In fact, I never really used this data structure in Java. I barely used it in C#, kind of dabbled in it here and there in other languages, but Ruby uses it everywhere. Okay. Now, most of you guys probably know what this is, but it's very important that we go over what it is so we're all on the same page about what it is and I'm going to code it. I'm going to show you how to code and play around with it, okay? So what I'm talking about is a Ruby hash, okay? Java has something called the hash map, right? So I think Java might implement dictionaries as well. C# implements dictionaries. Swift and Objective-C use NS dictionary, okay? They're all the same thing, just implemented in different languages, okay? In Ruby, we call it a hash, okay? It has a lot of different names, actually. Some people call it hash map, some people call it dictionary, some people call it an associative array. Some people just call it key value pairs, okay? A key and a value pair, okay, in a hash, okay? So again, how many people have used a hash map in Java? Not that many, right? Maybe 5 or 6 out of the room. How many people have used a dictionary in any other language? Again, maybe half the room, right? This is a data structure, again, that not a languages a lot don't really promote it that much, okay? Like you can get by coding really complex Java applications without ever touching a hash map, okay? But in Ruby, and specifically Ruby on Rails, you're going to use hashes everywhere. They use them all over the place, okay? It's a really powerful little data structure that they use all over the place. Okay, so what is a Ruby hash? I talked a little bit about this last week. All a Ruby hash is, okay, the easiest way to think about it, the way I think about it, and the way I learned it, okay, was think of it like an array. How many people here know what an array is? Okay, how many people have coded an array? Awesome. So that's a good place to start. We all know what arrays are. We all have used an array, right? So when you think about an array is a collection of items, okay? That's one part of it. That's usually how you describe it to people, right? It's a collection of items. But the really powerful part about an array is that it's an indexed collection of items. It's not like a linked list, right? You don't have to traverse the list to find your item. It's an indexed collection of items. That means you can access any item just by giving me the index. You don't have to go to the next child. You don't have to go back and forth all this. You basically can access that element directly with an index, right? Now, in arrays, the indices are integers, right? You have arrays that have an element at element 0, element 1, element 2, element 3, element 4, element 5, right? This should be stuff that you guys know, right? If you want to access the first element, you do array square brackets 0, right? If you want to access the third element, you do array square brackets 2, right? And we're all software engineers here, so we know the little hint about base 0 stuff, right? So those are arrays, right? They're basic collections of items that are indexed by integers. Does everybody understand that? Good. You can stay in software engineering or computer science or whatever you guys are, electrical, whatever. Okay, what a hash is, it's very similar. The only difference is you're not using integer indexes or indices, okay? Rather than using array square bracket 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, that number there can virtually be anything you want. It could be a string. It could be another object, which gets really weird, but you could put an object as your key. You could use another integer. You could actually create an array from a hash if you wanted to. Okay, it could be anything you want. Okay, very commonly people use strings. Okay, so you got something kind of like this. We've all seen the kind of array on the left, on the right, on the left. Right? We have my array 0 equals Joe. Right? So we store the element Joe, the string Joe, inside the array element 0, right? And then my array 1, Mary. Okay? A hash is very, very similar. Okay? So you store Joe at a certain position. You store Mary at a certain position. But rather than labeling that position with an integer, you can label it with whatever you want. In this case, I'm using strings. Okay? So I could say my hash at person 1 is Joe. My hash at person 2 is Mary. Okay, that's what a hash is. Okay? The reason people call this key value pairs is because they usually call this the key and this is the value. Right? So person 1, Mary. Person 1, Joe. Okay? It's very important you understand this. When you guys later on get into JavaScript, some of you probably are already into JavaScript. When you later get into JavaScript, all JavaScript objects are based around this key value pair, notion. Okay? How many people now know what a hash is? Okay, good. It's not too hard, right? It's crazy. I went through an entire undergrad here, right? And I'm not knocking the education system here. I'm very proud of the education I got here. But I never really understood what a hash is. This is a really mystical thing to me. And as soon as somebody just said, it's like an array that just has different indices, it's like, it's so easy to understand. Okay, key value pairs, dictionaries, they're all the exact same thing, okay? You basically have some kind of key and some kind of value. Okay, now mind you, on the right side, we've always been able to store whatever we want, right? On the right side, we could have stored integers, we could have stored objects, we could have stored, whatever we wanted, right? But the index was always an integer for arrays, and hashes, it can be anything as well. Okay. Now remember, I think in Java, actually, yeah, definitely in Java, your arrays have a certain type, right? Although they're getting into generics now. But anyways, arrays usually have a type, right? An integer array or a string array or whatever, right? So you can only store strings together and integers together, right? Hashes, I can't remember in Java because I use them so little. Here in a hash, you can store any key, any value, okay? So again, this could be an integer, this could be a string, this could be integer, that could be string, all in a single hash, okay? That's what a hash is. Now, remember, there's a lot of concepts today. So we know what a hash is, right? Everybody knows what a hash is? On the count of 3, we'll say yes. 1, 2, 3, yes. Good. All right. The second concept we're going to introduce today is a new data type. Everybody knows what strings are. Everybody knows what integers are. Everybody knows what doubles are. Probably know what a float is. If you don't, get out of this class. I'm kidding. Everyone's welcome. Okay, there is another data type in Ruby called a symbol. Okay? Now, for most intents and purposes, symbols and strings are perfectly interchangeable. Okay? If you concatenate a string with a string and a string and a symbol, they're basically the same thing. So anywhere where you see colon name, it's basically like saying name with quotation marks in it. Okay? For most intents and purposes, they're basically interchangeable. There's some performance gains you get from symbols over strings. Okay? Some of you might have heard that strings are immutable, and they can be very memory intensive because if you type the string hello 10 times to concatenate it, each one of those strings takes up a memory block. Okay? Symbols don't do that. Symbols actually reuse the same piece of data over and over again. Okay? So there's moderate performance gains when you deal with that. Okay? But you know what? It's not that big a deal. The thing that you want to know is that basically, anytime you see a symbol, you can think of it as a string. Okay? But here's the thing. In Ruby, in hashes, the most common key that you'll use is a symbol. Okay? In this example, the key was a string. Okay? In Ruby, it's very common to use a symbol as your key. Okay? So what we end up with is something more like this. Rather than my hash person1 equals Joe, we have my hash the symbol person1 equals Joe. Okay, my hash the symbol person2 equals Mary. Okay, that's very common in Ruby, is using those symbols. Okay, so how many people understand that? Good. Okay, just stepping you along here. Okay. Now the really nice thing about hashes is that hashes are really nice ways to structure data without building a full class. Right? Let's say you want to structure a bunch of data together, like somebody's name and their age and their hair color and their eye color, but you don't want to create a full person class. Okay? You can create basically a hash of those values, right? Create a hash and say the hash value at name is Casey and the hash value at age is 3. You can kind of create these things together, right? So that's why they become very useful. And they should be useful in all languages, to be honest, because in instances where you don't want to create a class, you can structure this data really nicely together. Okay? All right. How do we do this syntactically? How do we use this in Ruby? Okay, so there's a couple of things here. So when we declare an array, all right, can somebody raise their hand and tell me how you declare an array, an empty array in Java?
Oh, in Java?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically you do is like for example, let's say like for integer.
Yep.
You do int.
Okay.
Square brackets.
Okay.
And then the name of it.
Yep.
And then equals.
Yep.
New integer, then the size of it.
Awesome. Okay. So you have int square brackets, which declares the type, right? It's an integer array. Give the variable name, my array, equals, and then new int the size, right? So that's a good way to do it, okay? Can you do literal arrays in Java as well? Can you just say like int square brackets, my array equals just square bracket to declare an empty array. Can you do that?
No, you have to.
You can't do that.
There's a new int and empty bracket.
And you have to do that. Okay, new int empty brackets. Okay. Well, in Ruby, the way we declare empty arrays, because arrays and Ruby are not typed. Okay, so you can have an array of integers or strings or a mix of both, right? You can literally just type my array equals square brackets, and you have an empty array. Okay, so you can literally type in something like, let's see here. You can literally type something like this to declare an array. Okay, I think you can do something similar to this in Java, though, right? Like that. You need curly brackets though to do that? Okay.
You also need to say that the variable is
an int, right? Okay, cool. Okay, so in Ruby, we strip it all down. Just the variable name, no type, equals the array, empty array, or a array like with values in it. Okay. Now a hash, the way we declare a hash is using curly braces. Okay, so if you want to declare an empty hash, okay, you use curly braces. That is an empty hash. Then you can start setting keys and values on it. Okay, so you can say my hash at a certain key. So let's say person, or let's say name, equals that. Okay. You can actually try this all out in Rails console. I don't know why I'm not doing this in Rails console, just saving on time a little bit. So my hash name equals Casey. It's very similar to how you do array, right? So like array, my array at index 0 is going to be the value, 24 or something. Okay. So my hash at the key name is going to be Casey. You could also do my hash at the age is 34. I'm actually 33. Okay. So this is how you play with hashes. Okay. Does that make sense to most people? Okay. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you about hashes. Oh, by the way, sorry. If you want to access the value, you just type it in, like, say you want to output it to the screen, put s, my hash name. It's like getters and setters, right? Equal something, you can get it back that way. Okay, one last thing I want to show you is how you can declare a hash just in a literal. Without having to go, my hash is an empty hash, then assign the name of Casey, age 33. You can do it in one line and say, this is my hash. Just like we can say, this is my array, we can specify it all in one command. Okay? So the way we do that, okay, we have the curly braces, always starts out curly braces. Now the syntax gets a little funky here, okay? It's always key, arrow, value, okay? So if I want to do the same hash up here, I specify the key first. Okay, what's the key here? Name, right? And it's a symbol. So we just specify the key. Okay, the key there. And then we do arrow. And then the value. Let me raise that up a little bit. Okay. Key value. Now, what if I want to put another key value in that same declaration? Just separated by a comma. Okay. So there's one key value pair. Separate with a comma, the next key value pair. Age 33. Okay. And you can add more and more values. Okay, so that's how you declare a hash. Does that make sense? Key, arrow, value. Now, since you guys are so good and you're keeping up with these little lessons, I'm going to show you one other way to declare hashes. And to be honest, this is the way most Ruby programmers are going. Okay? It's just a different way to write this syntax. Okay? Just different syntax to write the exact same thing. Okay, I think this was introduced in Ruby 1.9. Ruby 1.8, you can't do this. Okay, Ruby 1.9 and above, you can do this. Most of us are Ruby 1.9 or 2 and above, right? So the other way you can declare a hash, remember, it's the exact same thing, okay? is you can put the symbol, but with the colon afterwards, okay? And then you can specify the value itself. These are the exact same statement, okay? Now, I want to warn you, remember how I told you keys could be anything. They could be strings, they could be objects, they could be symbols. This secondary syntax only works if your key is a symbol, okay? This only works if these keys are symbols. You can only do this flipping thing if your keys are symbols. And remember, you don't put the arrow in there anymore. And the spacing is very important here. That colon has to be right up against that symbol name, okay? Now, where this gets really confusing is that in the future, when you guys become JavaScript programmers as well, which is also in the web stack, right? You're going to code Ruby, you're going to code Java. Java objects look super similar to this, okay? But they're allowed to have spaces in between. They use key value pairs like this as well, but they're allowed to have spaces in between. Ruby is not, okay? I think Ruby went this route because it's very similar to JavaScript, which is gaining a lot of popularity, okay? So you will see either this syntax or this syntax. They're both the exact same thing. Question?
So now if there's no colon in front of the name, like the second one, is that not a symbol?
It's still a symbol. Yeah, this syntax basically reduces to this. This is like a shorthand for this. Yeah. So that's why I say this only works if you're intending this key to be a symbol, because it's gonna turn this into a symbol. And again, because Ruby generally uses symbols for their keys, like almost every hash you deal with in Ruby, the key is a symbol. Okay, like I'm honestly talking like 99% of the time, your keys are symbols. You're kind of free to use that syntax. Okay, going forward, I'm going to be using this syntax almost always. Okay. All right. Any questions about Ruby hashes? Everything that I just typed in here is in the slides. Okay, so you can look at it here. Okay, so this is how you initialize hashes. This is the alternate syntax. This is how you can access the values, and this is how you can set the values, okay? We're going to be using a hash today. In fact, you've already used the hash, actually. The params hash, okay? So we'll get back. Okay, any questions? Okay, that was our little sidebar. That's it for Ruby hashes. Let's get back to the meat of our course. Okay, so remember our goal was to build this Restful resource for a blog post. We want to do all of these things to a blog post. Read it, create it, read it, update it, and delete it, right? So last week, we finished index and show. Okay, today, we are going to be doing new and create. And if that wasn't enough theory for you guys, there's a lot more coming today, okay? But trust me, if you get through today, you will have understood a lot, okay? All right, luckily, most of this is the coding exercise, okay? So a little bit of theory. What is the new action supposed to do? We talked about the index action. What's the index action supposed to do?
List all the blog posts.
List all the blog posts. Give that man a sticker. What is the show action supposed to do? Display a specific blog post, right? So index is a list. Show is a specific blog post. You can think of it as like Facebook users. The index of users would be all your friends. When you click on their page, that goes to their show page. Okay? All right. So new and create. What does new do? Two different things, okay? It's a little bit of the nuance of the web. So what the new action is supposed to do is just present a form to the person so that they can enter information to create that resource. It doesn't actually create the resource. All it does is present them the form. That's all new is supposed to do. Okay, so present them the form with the proper fields and a submit button. That's what the new action's all about. Okay, doesn't require any payload. That means when you make the request, you don't have to send anything with the request. Okay, so there's no payload on there. And the URL looks like this. It's a GET request to /resources/new. Okay, so for our blog posts, it would be get/blogposts/new. Okay, that's the new action. The create action, on the other hand, is the thing that actually does the creation in the database. Okay, so what happens is we present them a form with the new action. They have to send another request to actually create the thing they want to create. All right, so it typically goes something like this. The person sends a request to get the new form. right? They send a request to get/blog post/new. We present them a form to fill out. They fill out that form, okay? And then they hit submit. That sends the subsequent request to do the create action, okay? So this is all, again, request response. The new is just a request to get a form back. Once the form is back, that transaction is done, right? They have the form sitting on the browser. They could leave, they could go offline, they could go sleep, whatever. Come back to it tomorrow morning, they fill it out, hit submit. That's another request to actually create the thing in the database, okay? Now that's the create's job, okay? How it responds after it creates is kind of totally up to you, but we're gonna follow some typical Rails conventions of what happens after the thing is created, okay? This is the first request that we've encountered that does carry payload with it, okay? All up till now, I've been sending requests with the URL and nothing else. I say get blog posts. I say get blog post/ID. I say new, get/blog post/new. That's it. I don't want to send anything extra with it. This is the first request that we are going to send some extra data with it, okay? We are going to send a request. It's going to be of a post type, okay? And it's going to go to that URL. But along with it, we're going to send the data of what we want to create. So if we're going to create a blog post, we're going to send the title and the body that we want to go into that blog post. If we're going to create a product, we're going to send the title, the description, and maybe a couple pictures or whatever, right? That's what we're going to send to our Rails app to actually create that resource. That's what new and create are, okay? Typically, you say that the new form posts to the create action. Okay, anytime you have a form, you'll see a lot of web people talk about it's going to post to something. Okay, don't think, you can just think of it when you're posting to something as just sending a request of type post. Okay, I think that's the clearer way to think of it because all request response, right? Okay, fire up your development environments, open up Sublime, start up your Rails server. I should probably do that myself.
Do you guys have an iPhone charger by any chance?
You'll get a free sticker if you do.
Yeah, you did?
So Vagrant up, Vagrant SSH into your machine, Rails server -B0000. So /vagrant, once you're SSH'd in, /vagrant /my website. And then Rails server -B000. S stands for server, B stands for bind. Okay? So the Rails server and bind it to 0.0.0.0. That means any request that comes into this, it's going to accept. Okay, once your server is up and running, make sure you can actually visit localhost 3000. Should get back to where we were. All right, we got our website. We got our blog. Okay, let's open up Sublime. Open the source code to my website. Okay, Rails routing. Once a request comes into the Rails server, what's the first file it hits?
Routes.
Routes. Okay, give Patrick a sticker. Patrick deserves about 10 stickers by this point. Okay, routes. Remember, the new request is get/resources name /new. Okay? So let's create a new route called get/blog post /new. Okay? That's the request. Okay, and that is going to go to the blog posts new action. We're going to create a brand new action for this. Okay, do you have 2 extra stickers? Because if anybody answers this question, they should get 2 stickers. Wow, the joy. What's this? What's the question? Can anybody see a problem with what I've coded? That's beautiful. Arsani?
Can I guess?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure. We have get so many times when you can like reduce. Can you
That's
reduce that?
that's along the lines of the problem. That's not the exact problem itself. Yeah.
New has to be before the show.
New does have to be before the show. Why?
Might be an ID.
It might be an ID. Okay. We have a dynamic route here. Okay. Get/blog post ID da 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 da. Remember what I said last week when we were coding this? That ID could be anything. Okay, it happens to be numbers that I'll actually find something, but you could type anything you want in that URL and it's going to match to this. So if you type the word new, okay, it might actually match to this route up here, okay? So the question is, how does it know which one to match? Routes goes from top to bottom, okay? That's how routes works. So you want to put your most generic routes lower. Okay, because again, if you type get/blog post/new, it's actually going to hit this route and match that first. And then it's going to try to find a blog post with the ID new, and it's going to say, no, there's no blog post with the ID new and crap out. Okay, so good, we got to move that up. So you can copy and paste it and just move it up. I probably shouldn't have done that with a shortcut because that was probably pretty quick. Okay, so I've literally taken this line here, cutting it, moving it in between there. Okay. You can decide how those stickers were distributed. Okay, so now it's going to hit this first. So that's good, okay? And then if we type in any number, it's not going to conflict because get/blog post/ID won't match this one. It'll match this one next. Okay? Awesome, we got the route. What's the next thing we got to do after we have the route? Controller action. Perfect. So let's go to our controller action. So blog post controller. By the way, you guys are using Sublime really regularly now. If you're on a Linux machine or Windows machine, Control P will give you a little typing box where you can type any file that's in your project. You can just start typing that file and go directly to it. On a Mac, Command P. Okay? So I can type Command P, start typing blog post controller, and hit enter. And it'll get there faster. All right, so we got to create a new action. Okay, so we have our index, we have our show. Let's create a new action. Got our new action in there, that's perfect. What is the thing we must always do at the end of our action? Render, return a response. Always have to return a response. Okay, that is the rules of the web. We have to return some kind of response. Okay, so let's take care of that first before we do anything, okay? So we're going to render. And we're going to create a new template for this. Okay. So render new. Okay. Now here's where things get literally just, I'm going to tell you how it is versus there's no way you could have logic this out. Okay. So we are going to instantiate a dummy blog post. Okay, we're just going to create a blank, empty blog post, okay, that we're going to use to build our form. Okay, we're just going to create this dummy blog post. It's not going to be used after we create the form. It's not going to be used anywhere else. Just this dummy blog post that we're going to create so we can create the form. Okay, so let's set up that dummy blog post. Okay, we're going to instantiate a new blog post. So how do I instantiate new blog posts? .new. Right? Very similar to Java's new keyword, right? So I want you guys to understand that this blog post that we've just created is in no way going to be saved to the database. It's just a dummy blog post that we're going to use to help us build the form. Because if we have a dummy blog post, we can look at it and we can say, oh, what does it have on it? Oh, it has a title. Oh, it has a body. Right? We're just going to use this to help us build the form. This is not the blog post we are saving in the database, okay? Which brings up a pretty important point that I glossed over in Ruby on Rails. Everything that you guys create in memory in the routing structure, request comes in, goes to the routes, goes to the controller, you play with the model, you send it to the view, you use it in the view, and you spit it back to the response. Everything you do in that is self-contained within that request. okay, that means the next request that comes up, you don't have access to those instance variables that you created or anything. The only thing that's persistent throughout the entire thing is what you save to the database. The database is persistent. But between requests, everything you create in memory is gone, okay? All right, so when we go to the create action, which is a brand new request, this blog post no longer exists. Just remember that, okay? We'll get to that. Okay, so we've created this, right? We're gonna render the new template, so what's the next step? Create a new template, right? So we've created the action. We have the route that hits that action. Now we got to render that template. If we're going to say render new, there better be a new template. Where do we find that new template? Views?
Blog posts.
Blog posts. Perfect. It's always in the name of the controller, right? All right, so under blog posts, we create a new file, save it, and remember that Sublime can be finicky, so make sure you're saving into the right folder. You should have new.html.erb. For now, let's just create a header called new blog post. Okay, let's not put anything in it yet. Let's just make sure our whole routing structure works. Okay. So new blog post. Okay, so our server should be still running. Let's go send a GET request to /blogpost/new. There we go. It rendered. Remember what render does? It takes your HTML template, throws it into the application.html.erb layout, and spits it back. Remember, render also interprets any ERB code, which we learned last week, right? There was no ERB code in this case, so there's nothing to throw in there, okay? Okay, we are going to create our first form. How many people here have done an HTML form before? Okay, not very many. Okay, know that what we're about to do, okay, is we are about to use some Ruby on Rails methods that generate straight up HTML. Okay, remember, the browser can't understand Ruby. Okay, the methods that we use spit out HTML, just like ERB. Remember how we had ERB, right? We had 1 + 1, that was a 2, and then that spit out just the number 2. No 1 + 1, just spit out the number 2. 2 is understood by the browser. So we're going to use some methods here that spit out HTML. Unfortunately, again, due to the nature of this course and the condensedness of this course, I can't explain the syntax fully, okay? It does take a little while to understand that. You're just going to have to follow along the code. Believe me, you can code for months just following this kind of code structure, okay? So here we go. We are going to use a method called form_for, okay? So we're going to do server-side tags because this is Ruby code, all right? Browser doesn't understand Ruby. We got surrounded by server-side tags. And the output from this, we actually want to be in the document. So we have to have that equal sign in there, right? So here's a method called form_for. Okay? And what this method allows us to do is pass in an object. And once you pass in an object, it spits back a form builder to help you build forms. Okay? You pass in an object. It's going to yield a little variable that you can build forms off of, okay? And I'll show you where that becomes important. Okay, so this is a method, okay? We're going to pass in an object. The object we're going to pass in is the dummy blog post that we built. We have access to it because it's an instance variable, remember from last time, okay? So what this method is like you're building a form for an object. That's why it's called form_for, right? You're building a form for an object. So I'm building a form for the blog post. It's going to yield a form builder back to me, okay? This is what I can't go over with you guys right now, okay? If you're very interested, look up Ruby blocks, okay? And you'll understand what this means. All right, the syntax is do, end. Okay, so just like if else, for each end, okay? We have this form_for do end, okay? And remember how I said it yields a form builder back to us? Where that shows up is in between two pipes here. Again, if you're really curious, look up Ruby blocks. You'll understand how that works. JavaScript programmers are probably very familiar with this. It's like passing in an anonymous function. Actually, Java programmers do that too. anonymous function on event handlers. It's kind of similar to this. Okay, so that's what we got. Now, we are going to type that form build. We're going to access that form builder variable quite a bit. I don't like typing that much. Again, Rubyists don't like typing that much. I'm just going to call it F. Okay, we can name that variable whatever we want. Let's just call it F. But know that that's an object that's spit back by this method essentially. Okay. Okay. Now within the do end, just like the each, okay, just like when we iterated over a loop, we have access to that variable in this do end block. Okay. So the form builder that it spits back is associated with the blog post. So it's smart enough to know things like the blog post has a title. It's smart enough to know like things like the blog post has a body. It's even smart enough to know that if that blog post actually has a value for the body and the title, it's going to fill in your form for you, which will come very in handy in the future. Okay. So here's how we're going to do. We're going to use that blog post, or the form builder, sorry, and we're going to create a label from it. Okay. Now, it knows that a blog post has a title and a body. Okay. So we're going to say create a label for the title. Actually, let me be a little bit more clear about this. This is like this. A method call on that object. Form builder dot label, pass in the title. Is there something wrong with what I've typed so far? Maybe not. Maybe yes. Let's see what. Yeah.
Doesn't it have to be like within like the?
Booyah! Sticker. This is Ruby code, right? We've already closed off that top. We've already closed off the bottom. This thing's just sitting out there in the middle. If we left it like that, technically it doesn't have to be. Nothing's going to happen. We're going to see f.label title, right? F.label title, but that's not what we want, right? Yeah. So, good answer. So we need that to be in server-side tags. And again, because we're Rubyists, let's get rid of those parentheses. We don't need them. Hey, I got my label for the title. Now I'm going to put the text field underneath it. Okay? I want it underneath. So I don't know if you guys have ever come across BR, but basically that means break. You're going to break the line. You're going to go underneath the next line, okay, to where we want to put the next thing. So server-side tags again. I think Sean asked me this last class. How am I doing that shortcut to do the server-side tags? I didn't have an answer then. I don't think I have an answer now. There's a plugin in Sublime called Embedded Ruby that you can download, and you can set up shortcuts to do things like that. Okay, now we're going to create a text field for the title. So do f.text field. Again, that's a method on the form builder. Okay, and it's going to be for the title. Now, we're going to do the same thing for the body, okay? So, f.label for the body. Break onto the next line. f.text area for the body. Only difference between text field and text area. Text field is single line. Text area is a box, okay? So, typically you want more room to type your article, right? So we make it a bigger box. Now, the last thing I need to do to make this functional is create a button that actually submits the form. Okay, now, in regular HTML, that does exist. Labels exist in regular HTML. Text areas and text fields exist in regular HTML. Okay, so do submit buttons and so do forms. These all exist in regular HTML. I'm going to show you why we're using Ruby to generate that HTML for us. Okay. You could actually code this entirely in HTML, okay? But we're just using Ruby to help us do this, okay? So we're going to add a submit button. So the form builder also has a method called submit. Okay? To create a submit button. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Let's see if this worked. Let's go to our browser, refresh the page, and boom. Not looking great, but it's got everything we need. It's got the title label, a text field, and then body, and then the text area for body, and then create blog post button. Okay. So I'm going to make that look a little bit nicer without getting into CSS. I just kind of want my title and my title field to be in its own section, and body and the body field to be in its own section. So I'm just going to surround them by div tags. Divs are a way to just separate things in HTML. Okay, think of it as division. Okay, so let's just put div tags around each of these fields. And indent nicely because we're good programmers. Okay, so I'm just surrounding those fields with open div, close div, open div, close div. Okay, by default, anytime you create a div, it creates a new section, a new line. Okay, so some would have argued I should have used divs instead of break. Break is a very frowned upon HTML element. Okay. Okay, let's do that. Let's take a look now. Okay, it looks a little better. That's as far as I'm going with organizing how it looks. Okay, because we're not doing CSS in this class. Okay, but it's got everything we need. It's got a title tag, it's got a body tag, it's got create blog post. Let's take a brief look at the HTML that it created. We right click, and you're using Chrome or Firefox, even Safari does this now, I think. Internet Explorer probably does it too now. You can either view the page source or inspect. Okay, they'll both show you the source code that was generated. I'm going to do view source code. If I click on the page here, view page source, just scroll down, and you'll see it creates a form for me. And I could have coded this all by hand. Creates a form, a div tag. You see where I put f.label, it created a label tag. Where I put f.text field, it created an input field of type text. Created a label tag for the body, the text area, and it created a submit button. Okay? That's what these helpers do for you. Now, if you are used to creating forms yourself, I highly advise against it. Use the form builders in Rails because they're going to name everything for you properly. If you look at the names and IDs of all these things, okay? Look at how, look, they're all named consistently. Name, blog post, square brackets, title. Name, blog post, square brackets, body. Okay, things like that. It's going to have a form class that's going to do post to / blog post. It does everything for you properly. Okay? And in fact, there's one thing it does that you guys can't code by hand anyways. It inserts this authenticity token. Go look it up. It's beyond the scope of this course, okay? But anyways, long story short, we are using form helpers to build this form for us. And that's how you should always build your forms in Rails. Okay? That's it. You're done the new action. Congratulations, guys. We now have a new blog post there. All right? Let's create a link to get to that, though. Okay? Rather than me having to type in /blog post /new, let's create a link to actually get to that request. So I'm going to put it on the blog page itself. So on my blog index, right, I have my blog index here. I'm just going to put a little link at the top that says new blog post. So I can click it and get to my new form. Okay? So let's go to our index page. Okay. And before we list all the blogs, I'm just going to put a little link here. That goes to /blog posts /new. I'll call the link new blog post. Okay, this is what I just typed. Okay, the only thing really new there was creating the dummy blog post and building a form around it. Everything else was the exact same. Routes, controller action, spit out a template, spit out a response. Okay? So the only thing really new there was we used something called a view helper, just a method that we have access to in the views. Okay? Just a method to build forms for us. Okay? And then we just created a link to it. Okay? Nothing new. All right? How many people understood that? Good. Okay, everybody stand up for 5 seconds. Stretch your legs. That's a hard 5 seconds. Let's go. All right. Turn to the person to your left and introduce yourself. And to your right. All right, sit back down. We have no time. Let's go. Next time, you guys should find out some more about each other. If you already know the person, ask them their most deep, intimate secrets. Okay, we've finished the new action. Now, things get really complex. But I'm going to help you through it, okay? So, we've created the new action. That request and response cycle is completely done. Okay? In general, web is what we call stateless. Okay? Once that request and response has happened, that's it. Okay? It's as if we could have gotten to that state at any point, and we send the next request. It would be regardless of what happened before it. Okay? So that request and response tab. That's why I was so adamant about emphasizing to you guys what request and response is all about. We did a request, we got the response back, we got the form. Now we're starting a new cycle for request and response. We're going to do the create action. Okay, here we go. So we need a new route. So the new route is going to be the create action. Does anybody happen to remember what type of request it was? Post. Good. Does anybody happen to remember what the URL was?
/post/new.
Not quite. That's it. /blog posts. We just post directly to /blog posts. And this is going to go to yet another new action we're going to call create. Same controller. We're using the same controller for all these. Just a new action now, okay? Can anybody see a problem with this code that I've typed?
Should create be before the ID?
Should create be before the ID? Good question. I'm sorry, I tricked you. There's nothing wrong with what I've typed. That's a trick question.
It's a different type.
It's a different type, exactly. Again, I don't have enough stickers for you. So the only reason these two were conflicting originally is because they're both GET requests. Okay? This is a different type. This is POST. So if we sent a POST request, it's not going to conflict with any of the GET requests. Okay? So we're okay on that one. Now, these two have the same URL, so there could have been some conflict there. Right? They both have the exact same URL, but they're different types. Okay? If this was a GET, then yes, we'd have a big problem. Because it would match this one before it matched this one. Okay? So post request / blog post. Next step. Controller. Beautiful. Let's create the controller action. Create. You guys are getting better at Sublime. You can actually type def tab, and it'll create the end for you as well. Okay? Okay. Here's where things start to crumble in understanding, because I might not be that good at teaching this to you guys. Here we go. Okay, so remember what I said, that the create request is a post request to /blog posts, but it carries with it some payload. Okay? It's going to carry with it some data. How do we send a request with data? Okay? I told you how to send a GET request. You type it into the URL bar and hit enter. Another way you can send a GET request is create a link on your page. If someone clicks on that, that's a GET request. How do you send a post request? And the second question is, how do you send data with that post request? Okay? One of the ways you can do that, one of the standard ways you can do that in regular web, regular HTML, is with a form. Okay? Anytime you create a form tag, you can specify that if this form is submitted, it's going to submit a request to a certain URL, and it's going to submit it with a certain type. Okay? Go back to your new page. This is our new page. Okay? Let's look at the page. Let's look at the source again. Right-click anywhere on the page and view page source, or right-click on one of the elements and inspect element. Okay? This is the code that Form 4 generated for us. HTML allows us to use this form tag. HTML understands this, and it allows us to specify certain properties of that form. The first thing it allows us to say is when you hit submit, when you submit this form, it's going to send a request to a certain URL. That URL is specified by the action property. Okay? Don't get this confused with Ruby on Rails actions. This is HTML we're talking about right now. Okay? So form action. Action is going to send a request to /blog posts. That is what we're accepting, right? It's a request sent to /blog posts is what we're accepting. So this is already sending it to the right place. The second thing is, what type of request are we expecting? Post. Post. We're expecting post, right? That's the way we coded it. We said post /blog post. This is what we're trying to get. So we're sending to /blog posts. Okay. We're going to submit it with the type post. Okay. The method attribute on a form tag tells you what type of request is going to be sent. By default, forms are post. You can actually technically submit a form via get and via patch and via delete and all those things. Okay. By default, it's post. If you want to explicitly specify it, you specify with the method post. Question?
Sort of like, I guess a funny comment. When I was starting to learn this, I thought it was just a whole bunch of gibberish that was up top there.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Again, you can code this by hand, but Ruby on Rails knows that when you generate a form, okay, when you're generating a form, typically that form is going to submit to /blog post and with a post request. That's how powerful that form for thing is doing. That form for is looking at that blog post object and says, oh, this is a blog post object. They must be submitting it to the blog post's URL. And oh, by the way, this is a dummy brand new object. This isn't a saved object. This is a brand new object. So I must be doing a post to that. That's why you use form for. It'll generate. So just by creating a form and creating a button at the bottom within those form tags that's of type submit, that's how you generate a post request. Okay, that was the first thing I said. How do you generate? This is one of the ways you can generate a post request, is by submitting a form. The second question was, how do you send payload data with it? Well, when you submit a form, any input tag that's in the form tags will go as data, okay, as part of that request. So we have an input tag here. Sorry, text area works as well. Text area tag there, okay? These two pieces of data will be sent as part of the payload. Well, the question is, how do I identify that payload on the other side? How do I identify that on the Rails side? It's with these name values, which we'll get into. Okay? But the question I was asking you is, how do you send a post request? How do you send payload data? All you have to do that is create a form and put some data inside it. So this is a form, has input tags. When we hit some post request, okay? So rather than us typing in a URL in the URL bar and hitting enter, we're going to submit that form. So the code is already there to submit the form. We just have to handle that now. When they hit submit, it's going to send a post request to /blog posts, which is going to hit our create action. So we have to now handle that. Okay, the code is already there to send that request. We have to handle that request. Okay. Does that make sense? Cool. How many people? Okay. All right, here we go. So we're going to handle that request. So our goal is to create a block from the data that comes in. Okay. So what we're going to use to do that is we're going to use the constructor, and then we're going to save it. Okay. So we're going to say at blog post.new. And we are going to set a bunch of variables, right? We're going to say at blog post.title equals some value that we don't know how to get yet. We're going to do at blog post.body equals some value that we don't know how to get yet. Okay. Now, there is a short form for this. Okay. How many people here have coded a Java class before? How many people have used the new keyword before? That's the default constructor, right? No arguments. How many people here have created a constructor that takes in arguments so you can set those instance variables without having to create getters and setters at the beginning. Good. Active record models have that built in. Okay? So you don't have to create that constructor. It's already built in for you. And what it takes in is it takes in a Ruby hash. So all coming together. Okay? So blogpost.new is the default constructor. Okay? There is another constructor that takes in a hash to set instance variables. Okay? So it's a method, okay, that takes in a hash. So there's an empty hash in the middle of it there. Okay? Now, hashes are always key values, right? The hash it's expecting is your keys are the names of the instance variables. So title and body. So we're going to have title and some value and body and some value. Remember how I told you I'm going to use the new syntax? Just contradicted myself. Okay, you could write it that way. Okay, the alternate syntax, remember, is to put the colon at the front and get rid of the arrow, right? So that's the exact same thing as writing title some value and body colon some value. Okay. So we don't need those lines below it anymore, because that's going to do it for us up top. Okay. So as long as we pass in a hash that has a title key and a body key, we can pass that hash into the new constructor, and that'll instantiate the blog post for us with those values. Okay? How many people used Form 4 5 minutes ago? Hopefully all of you. Okay, here is the magical linking of Ruby on Rails, one of them. Because you used Form 4, Rails automatically named your inputs a certain way. Okay? If we look at it here, Ruby on Rails automatically named this field blog post and then square brackets title. And then named this thing blog post with square brackets body. Okay? That's a Rails convention to name it that way. Now, if you name it that way, Rails is going to interpret that payload data in a certain way. So remember, we're going to hit submit. This form is going to post to our Rails app, and all this payload data is going to come with it. If that payload data comes named this specific way, Ruby on Rails is going to massage that data into a hash and throw it into the params hash. Okay? It's going to do all that manipulation for you. All right? So remember, we used the params hash before. We used the params hash to get the ID of the URL. That's only one of the things that the params hash stores. Another thing that the params hash stores is payload data. So let me write out for you what basically is happening, but you don't have to follow this. You don't have to type this. You just like to kind of understand, okay? So everybody close their laptops halfway so they don't put it to sleep. And just pay attention to this part, okay? Because this is a very cool theoretical thing that happens here. Okay, so the request comes in and hits our create action, right? So part of what comes in is a piece of payload data called blog post title. And then there's another thing that comes in called blog post body. Okay? If you were creating a product that had 10 fields, all these things would come in. Before it even hits this method, actually, Ruby on Rails does something to that. What it does is it gathers all the things that are named the same. Okay, so blog post, blog post, blog post, blog post, gathers them all together in a single hash. Okay, so what it does is whatever value comes in for title, whatever value comes in for body, it gathers together in a hash. Okay? So if those two values came in, Ruby on Rails would take those values, put it into a hash. Okay? Creates a hash for you. Then it takes that hash and puts it into a hash called params. Okay? So params itself is a hash. Okay? So params is a hash that looks like this, okay? And it has a whole whack of values, okay? There's a bunch of values. It's got anything from the dynamic route, okay? It's got, you know, some random values here that we don't even know about. If you were to ever look at this hash, it's massive. It like has all this information about your request. But one of the things it does is it creates a key named after what came in and assigns this hash to it. Okay? So it's a hash within a hash. So this is what we end up with. Okay, so we have this outer hash called params that has a bunch of values here that we don't know about, that we don't care about for now. Okay, but one of the keys is called blog post, and the value of that key is itself a hash with the values that we need. Okay, so that's what Rails does when you submit a form. Okay, it packages all nicely into the params. So how do I access that hash? Okay, we talked about accessing hash. We just specify the key, right? So if I want that hash, if I want this value here, okay, all I have to do is type params blog post, and I'll get that hash, right? Okay, does that make sense? Good. Okay, this is a hash with a key called title, and a key called body. That's exactly what we need in this constructor. Okay, so to get all those values from the form, put them in a way to throw it into a constructor, Rails is doing that for us already, and we just need to use it. Okay, so all we have to do, this params value is all we need. Okay, all we need to do is throw that into our new. And that's all you end up with. Again, normally in web programming, you would have to do all that manually. You wouldn't necessarily put it into hashes and all this stuff like that, but you'd have to access each field manually. Can you imagine if you had 20 fields? All right, it'd be really annoying. Rails does all that for you. Okay? Params hash. It does a lot of things. One of the things it does is summarize a form for you, okay? Okay, that's the first bit of complicated news. Second bit of complicated news we're going to get into. All right. So we're going to create our blog post. It's all good, okay? Now, there is a security problem that Rails developers realized before I started studying Rails. Because when I started, they figured this out. And what they figured out was, okay, anybody can technically create a form. Anybody can technically, on the web, as long as my route is open to people, they could create a form and submit that form to my website if I didn't have any further security around it, right? Remember, web is just request and response. The server has no idea where the request is coming from. The browser has no idea where the response is coming from, right? People could create their own forms. Now, imagine if you had a user resource. User resource has a name, has an age, has hair color, has favorite movies and whatnot. And let's say you create a field called isAdmin, okay? And you're using this isAdmin everywhere. If you're an administrator, you can delete accounts, you can delete posts, you can modify comments and stuff, right? Just because your form doesn't present that field doesn't mean a hacker can't create their own request, create their own form to submit it to your web server, okay? And what's really dangerous is that if you code like this, all nice Ruby minimalist, you might not ever see that. What if somebody in the future adds something to blog post called is modifiable by admin or something like that? You know, you never have to change that code and you never realize it, okay? So this is a security problem that Rails developers realized. They said, whoa, 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 this is dangerous. We are assigning a whole whack of attributes here, and one of those attributes could be very sensitive data, right? We're assigning a whole whack. We're mass assigning variables, okay? .new, among a lot of other among a lot of other variable or methods, are known as mass assignment methods. It means they're mass assigning a bunch of variables. There's a method called update that does the same thing. It takes in a hash, okay, and it mass assigns all those variables, okay? So what Ruby on Rails developers said is if you're ever calling a mass assignment on the params hash, you have to whitelist what can go in there. In other words, you have to explicitly specify as a developer what you're allowing in and what you're not allowing in, okay? This is what we call strong parameters, okay? Strong parameters is what's known as. In Rails 3 and below, this did not exist. Okay, this is new to Rails 4, strong parameters. Okay, it was kind of handled a little differently in Rails 3 and below, but we're doing Rails 4 and above. Okay, so how do we whitelist parameters from the params hash? Okay, we can specify a syntax that allows us to say what is required and what you're permitting through. So if you're ever submitting a form to this, okay, let's create a new variable called blog post params. And we're going to create a new variable, and it's going to be the permitted version of params. So params is a hash. It's not entirely accurate. Params is a very special hash, okay, that you're allowed to say set permissions on, okay? So that params hash that we have, or that special hash that we have, we can say, if you're ever submitting to this specific request right here, we absolutely require that you specify there's a blog post in there. So if blog post does not come in as part of your params, this thing's going to fail. So we say, if you're going to submit to this, you absolutely have to specify blog post. And within that blog post hash, we're going to permit certain variables. We are going to permit the title and the body. Okay. So what ends up happening is that returns params that have been kind of given the go-ahead to now go through mass assignment. Okay, so we're going to use those params now instead of the naked params here. Okay, so we just say blog post params. That's the permitted version now. Okay, that's strong parameters. Okay, we got about 10 minutes to cover one major topic. All right, so we've come a long way. We've created the new action, which presents the form, and the form has all the data and the button and the URL and the type of request that it needs to actually submit a post request. When we hit that submit button, okay, this is a brand new request now, it's going to hit this create action. Rails is going to massage all that form data into the params hash. Then we are going to whitelist certain variables on that params hash and use that in the mass assignment. Remember, strong parameters only applies to mass assignment. So if you were individually setting the title and the body and the way we had the code before, that's not technically a mass assignment, so you could have done that actually. But again, it's not safe. This is safer, right? This guarantees that programmers have to explicitly specify what is allowed on this. Okay? Okay, so at blog post, we now have our instantiated blog post with the title, with the body after all that, okay? Now let's save it just like we did in the data, just like we did in Rails console. So we have that variable, we will save it, .save. Okay, now there's something pretty cool about .save that I didn't tell you guys about. It saves it to the database, which is great, but it actually has a return value. Okay, the return value is true or false, depending if that save was successful or not. Okay, so we can basically say, what's the result of that save? Okay, and if that result was true, do something else, do something else. If we save the record properly, do something. If we didn't save it properly, do something else. Okay, we're efficient programmers here. We don't have to use that other variable result. Okay, so let's just put it back down there. We don't need all this. We can just do this. By the way, some people hate Rubyists for that kind of stuff. because you end up getting one line of code that like does like 50 billion things. You're like, what the hell does this do? Okay, if blog post save, else end. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to tell you guys exactly what we're going to do in each case. Okay, if the save is successful, okay, if we properly created the item in the database, the common Rails practice is basically to redirect them to the show page of that item. So think about it. If you create a user, you forward them to that user profile page. If you create a product, forward them to that product page. Okay. Now, there are certain instances where I found that doesn't really make sense. Like if you have a really simple data structure, let's say like you had tax rates, Ontario 13%, Alberta 5%, whatever, right? Like the show page of that's going to be so boring, right? It's going to be Ontario 5%. It's the exact same information you're going to see in the index. So you might want to redirect them to the index in certain cases, right? You can do whatever you want. The typical Rails convention is you forward them to the show page of that item that you just created. Okay? So now, if it fails, what we're going to do is we're going to present them with the new form again. Like this failed to save, we're going to present you with that form again. Okay? So what we're going to do is if else, okay, fails, we are just going to render the new page again. Now remember, all render does is it goes to that template and fills in all the ERB stuff, okay? This is not a new request. This is still within the same request. We're just reusing another template, okay? We're just reusing the new template. We're not gonna create a create template that has the exact same information, okay? Now, unfortunately, the way we've coded things, like unless you guys have done something else, this save is never gonna fail. We don't get into that in this class, okay? There's something you can do called validations on your models, and you can say, oh, it always has to have a title, or it always has to have a body, things like that. You can say the body has to be unique, or something like that, right? Or has to be an integer, things like that, right? So those are validations that you can say that will cause a save to fail. So if they enter bad data, the save will fail. So unfortunately, I can't actually show you what's going to happen here, but I'm going to talk you through it, okay? Actually, why don't we do this? That'll do it. That'll force us to go to the else block. Okay, this is just for demonstration purposes, okay? So it's going to render the new. Okay, watch what happens here. So we go to blog post new. That's one request. Presented me the form. I'm about to enter some data, right? I enter some data. Okay, I hit create blog post. Remember, that's going to send a request to our create action. Our create action is going to instantiate the blog post, but it's not going to save it because we don't actually have that save code. It's going to jump out to the render new. Okay. Now, it didn't look like a lot happened there, but what happened is it re-rendered that new page. Okay. But you'll notice this time that title and body are still filled in. Okay. Can somebody explain to me why that's happening?
You already have blog post with all the parameters.
Exactly.
So when we send it to render, there's the form for
Exactly.
fill up everything.
So in the new request, we created this dummy blog post that had no values in it. And remember, I kind of hinted at this a little bit. That form 4 will fill in values for you if that blog post has values. But in the new action, it didn't have any values. But the second time around, this create request, we're adding values to this blog post here, right? We're instantiating new blog posts with new values. So in this case, when we go to render new, it's using this blog post, right? Because render doesn't know anything. It just says render whatever you give me with that instance variable. And because we're passing in this blog post this time with values, that time it actually fills in values. So that's really handy, right? Because if they entered something in wrong, we just present them the form with whatever they entered, right? And say like, this is wrong, please update these values, right? Okay, so that's render new. Okay, let's go back to the code that it actually was. I really want you guys to focus on that render is not a new request. It's no different than what you guys have been doing today. You're picking a template and filling it in and setting it back. That's still within the same request cycle. The reason I want you guys to focus on that is because what I'm about to teach you, a lot of people seem to screw up and forget, and you'll see a lot of blog posts about what's the difference between redirect and render. Okay, render, we've gone over that a billion times. Your request comes in, goes to controller, you're telling it to take a template, evaluate all the ERB, throw it into the layout, and spit that back as a response, right? That is what render does. We are going to do something different here. If the blog post successfully saves, we are going to do something called redirect. Now, redirect is the last complicated concept you guys have to understand today. If you understand this, we are done. The rest of the course will be a breeze. Okay? And this isn't even that difficult as a concept, so that people just never really learn it. Okay? But we are going to call a method called redirect to. Okay? And what redirect takes in is a URL. Okay? So we are going to redirect to /blog posts / the ID of the blog post. Whoa. I never taught you guys string interpolation. Concatenate the ID, right? Because by that point, once we saved it, it actually has an ID. That's one of the key things to saving to the database. Once you save to the database, the ID is actually set at that point, right? So we're going to redirect to blog post /ID. Okay. I'm going to explain this in two different ways. One, physically, with my body. Two, with the diagram. Okay. We kind of did this last time. You in the back. What's your name? Yeah. Mahir? Okay. Mahir, you're going to be the web server. Okay. I'm the browser here. Okay. So, Mahir, I'm going to send you a GET request for new. Okay. So I launch you a GET request. What are you going to send back to me? You're going to send back the new template back to me. Right? You're going to render the new template. You're going to send it back to me. Okay. Mahir is going to send that back to me. I fill out the form. I hit create. That's going to send another request to Mahir. Okay. And he's going to process the request following this. Okay. Now, if that blog post fails, what he sends back to me is the render new response. Takes that data, massages it, sends it back to me. That makes sense, right? That's how render works. We know how render works, right? Now, if it's successful, Mahir, what are you going to do according to the code? You're going to redirect to blog post. Now, what does that mean? What is the response that he's sending back to me? The response that Mahir is going to send back to me is not a page. Okay, it's not an HTML page. All this time, we've been rendering HTML pages and sending them back. Mahir is not going to send me an HTML page in this case. He's going to send me instructions. That's all he's going to do. He's going to send me a packet back to me with instructions on where to go next. That's what a redirect is. So Mahir is going to send a packet back to me and say, hey, browser, what you should do now is send yet another request to go somewhere else. And he's going to tell me to redirect to blog post /ID. So he's going to send me a packet of instructions. That's going to have an actual ID at that point, right? 5, say, or 6 or whatever. Blog post /5. Once I get that, what the browser does with that is then sends yet another request. Okay? The reason people have trouble dealing with this is they think that instance variables that they set up here apply to whatever goes in here, which doesn't make sense because instance variables don't last over requests, right? We talked about that. So what Mahir sends back to me is simply an instruction to send yet another request. That's what a redirect is. Very different from render. Render, you're staying within the same request cycle, whereas redirect, what you get back is instructions to go to another spot. Okay? That's what I've tried to explain here. That's Mahir. This is me. I post the blog posts. If a successful save happens, I get this little packet back. It's called a 302 response. this little packet comes back and says, hey, Casey, go yet to another page. I open up that package. Oh, I better send another request. So I send another request, and that request is no different from you just typing in /blog post /5, hit enter. This bottom piece is no different than that. Okay, that's what redirect does. Okay, so there's actually 2 quick requests and responses that happen in that case. I send a request, the response comes back. I go for another request, I send a response back. The web is so fast that you don't notice that it's actually 2 separate requests. Okay, so this is done. Let's test it out. We're running a little bit late. We're almost done here, guys. So we're here, new blog post. Okay, so /blog post /new. Okay, let's fill in my awesome blog post. Had a great day today. People were happy. Okay, submit that. Again, 2 things are going to happen. I'm going to send Maher a request. Maher is going to send me a redirect response. I'm going to send another request to go to another page. Create, and boom. Let's convert that to a string. Sorry about that, guys. So it can implicitly convert integer to a string. So we convert to a string, .2s. Okay, let me try that one more time. Hey, my next new post. This data is so funny. Over time, it gets very creative. And then boom, I redirected to /blog post /7. Keep that redirect in mind, what's happening there. Okay, guys? Awesome. You can give Maher a sticker. All right. That's it, guys. Now you can create blog posts. Look, we go back to blog posts. Because it's saved to the database, it's all there. Okay, we can create these blog posts now through the web. We don't have to use Rails console anymore. Okay, create another blog post. They're really boring blog posts. Okay, there's the show page. Go back to the index page. There we go. All of them are there. Okay, thanks guys for sticking to this. Okay, that's mainly it. To give you a little hint, like I'm implementing this in my company right now. Okay, I literally launched this like a week ago. Okay, there's a blog here doing exactly what you guys are doing. Okay, nothing, like very little that's different from what you guys are doing. Okay, so you're getting very close. Okay, that was the hardest lesson you guys will have to deal with. If you don't understand it, again, read the notes. Okay, it's all explained in there. Next week, we are still here. We go over edit, update, and destroy, which will be everything you need to do to a blog post, okay? And then the week after that, it's canceled. Week 8, we clean it all up and show you a lot of Rails magic, okay? And then tell you where to go from there. Okay, thanks so much, guys. That was awesome.
And before you guys go, I got a shameless CISA promotion.